Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to Intentional Conversations podcast. We're so glad you're here. We're just giving it a moment or two to build up critical mass. We know that many individuals are trying to get settled into this virtual learning community. And so we're going to give it a second for all of us to be connected. While we wait, I'm so glad you're here. I want to welcome you. I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her. I am the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. Shout out the NWC team. And we are so glad that you are here, a part of our community. We do not take it lightly at all when individuals show up this hour of time to be a part of our community, to learn with and from each other. And we're so grateful to have you today. I want you to take a moment and go to the chat. Let us know where you are joining the conversation from today. It is always a treat for us to see the many different geographies that are represented across this community, not only from the US, but even outside of the US. And so let us know the cities that you are representing today. I am based in Greenville, South Carolina. That is where I reside, but our business is all over. Our colleagues are all over because our clients are all over. But I am in Greenville, South Carolina. If there are any other in the Carolinas, I want to hear from you. Place it into the chat. Wherever you are, let us know. I also want you to be aware that at NWC, we really value disability inclusion. And as such, we do have the closed caption feature that has been enabled for any of you that may find that as a benefit to your experience today. I also want you to know that if you're part of our Zoom community, cameras are welcome. We love to see smiling faces, but we also know that many of you are joining while you're multitasking. So maybe you're just listening in, and we certainly welcome that. Whatever capacity in which you're here today, we are grateful to have you. Now, we also have a live audience that will join us on LinkedIn. And so while many of you will register in advance and you'll show up to be a part of the Zoom community, we know that there are others who will catch this episode by scrolling on LinkedIn and catching the LinkedIn Live. And we want to welcome you just the same. I want you to know that you are very much a part of this broad community. If you will leverage the comment section, my team is watching that. They're bringing over your questions, your thoughts, your sentiments, so that we can be connected as one single group. And we're so grateful. I also want you to know that here at NWC, we not only make this podcast available for you all to show up live and in video replay that's added to our YouTube, but we also will extract the audio and make it available in podcast capacity for wherever you like to get your podcast content. So multiple ways to be connected. I see you, Sunnyside, Washington. So glad you're here. Thanks so very much. Once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations podcast. Let the show begin. Let the conversations begin, and that is precisely what we're about to do. If you're just tuning in, you have joined the Intentional Conversations podcast. I am your host, Dr. Nika White, and this is our 5th year celebrating intentional conversations. So we're super excited about this milestone. And as such, we are continuing to find ways all throughout the year to recall this milestone. And we're so glad that you are a part of this celebration along with us. Throughout our time together today, if something is said that catches your attention, that you want to amplify or provide some additional insight on, maybe there's a resource that comes to mind, I want you to make sure you're using the chat or the comment section if you're on LinkedIn Live so that we can share in all of those sentiments and thoughts. We want to make sure that is a way that we can leverage this virtual platform to be able to get proximate to each other as much as we possibly can. If you've been with us for quite some time, you know that we like to amplify national observances that takes place during the month. And so this will be no different today. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And I think we need to probably designate a mental health awareness daily situation, right? Because it's just that serious. We all need to be leaning into radical self-care. We all need to be making sure that those in our lives are also taking advantage of their well-being and seeing it as something that we owe ourselves, right? It's not a luxury. It is a responsibility for us to make sure we're leaning in to ensure our mental strength. And so I hope that you will help me in spreading that word. May is also Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And so this is a great way for you to build up your cultural humility, cultural intelligence, to learn more about the AAPI community. And let's make sure that we're standing in solidarity around their contributions and their dignity and their right to exist in a way that allows them to feel good about being a part of our spaces and places. At NWC, we have a number of resources that we like to make available as a courtesy to our broad community. This is our way of just showing up for the broader community to say, as we're learning together, as we're deepening our knowledge and our understanding, we want to be a conduit of resources while you're on that journey. We just released a new thought paper, and it's called The Indispensable Role of Community and Connectedness. And let me tell you, it's so timely because right now we all are leaning into community and connectedness because it is what we need in order to be able to get through this very tumultuous time that we're experiencing right now. And so I encourage you to see this as a resource, share it out. My team will actually place a link to it into the chat and as well as into the comment section if you're on LinkedIn Live. Additional resources, storytelling, cultural framework. We have lots of opportunities for you to take your organization to the next level as it relates to building a storytelling culture that even includes having a community of practice where you're bringing individuals together within your organization to upskill them on the importance of storytelling as a leadership competency. Stories connect us. They help us to deepen our empathy and our compassion. And it is a great way for us to really extend ourselves to build cohesion and greater collaboration. So if you're interested, we're going to share a link of information with you. We hope that you'll reach out to learn more. Now, I want you to know what you have to look forward to in terms of what's coming up in future weeks on Intentional Conversation podcast. I am super excited because next Friday we will be welcoming LaShawn Davis. That's on the 23rd. And LaShawn is going to be bringing some great insight into her role as a practitioner in the space of DEI and HR. And so I hope that you will join us 11 to 12 Eastern Standard Time, but not to worry if you can't join live, because again, there are multiple ways in which you can get this content, either by accessing the replay from our YouTube channel or by listening to the podcast. But I hope for those of you who can, you will be here next Friday for LaShawn Davis. And then following LaShawn, ending out the month of May, we have Hattie Mendez, who's going to be joining. And I'm super excited also about Hattie. She is doing some wonderful things. We're going to be discussing challenges, underestimated professional space. And so I'm sure all of us probably have stories that we could share on that topic. So help me to welcome Hattie on the 30th of the month. And we look forward to seeing you here. Now, for those of you who are new, one of the things that we love to do here before we actually release our guest co-host to greet the audience and be in conversation with me is I think it's so important for people to understand the accolades, credentials, experiences that our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation with. And so we do that by sharing their bio. So I'm going to do that at this time. And I'm super excited because our guest co-host today is Elise Ahenkorah. And Elise is an award-winning belonging strategist and change management leader with a track record of driving impactful initiatives that build representative teams, fair talent processes, and cultures that boost engagement, performance, and retention. As the lead strategist of Inclusion Factor, Elise uses data-driven strategies to show how healthy workplace advances performance, retention, productivity, and client and employee satisfaction. Her clients include Bayer Canada, the World Bank, McGill University, Cornell University, IBM, Sage Natural Wellness, Holt Refu, Waste Management, the City of Toronto, and the United Nations of Canada, just to name a few. And Elise's educational background is in law and justice and international relations, and she is an alumnus of Cornell University. She also has a CPHR, ProSci Change Management Practitioner, and a Canadian Certified Inclusion Professional designation. I want you to help me now by please reviewing finding all the features, finding all the words, the affirmations, and let's place them into the chat to let our guest co-host Elise know how appreciative we are to have her here. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can bring Elise into the spotlight. We're so glad you're here. Thank you so much for saying yes to our invitation. We've been following each other for a while now, so there's so much admiration and respect for the voice that you have around this important work that we both share. And I cannot wait for us to really dig into today's dialogue. But we do have a tradition here, Elise. And that tradition is before we release our guest co-host to greet the audience in their own way, we always will ask if they are willing to share something with us that we would not know from hearing their bio, which we've just done, or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. So, welcome, friend. So glad you're here. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I have been following you for some time, so it's such a huge pleasure to be here. A little bit about me that you would not catch from my bio is that I'm a first generation Canadian. I come from a family of Ghanaian hard hitters that have helped me be able to build the career I'm in. And so just shout out to anyone that is first generation North American or Canadian or US, whatever it may be. Shout out to all the immigrant families that have helped build the kind of realities that we're all living today. And I just wanted to give homage to my Ghanaian ancestors and my Ghanaian community for really helping me be here today.
Oof, love that. Love that. Love that. Love that. We're so glad that you're here today. And again, I want to make sure that I'm encouraging everyone. Let's use the chat throughout our time because that's going to be a great way for us to kind of keep the dialogue going. So, one of the other things that I want to mention before we jump in is that you also have a lot of contributions that have been extended to so many different organizations that you've been able to be a part of. I want to just share a couple of those. L'Oreal Paris, Woman of Worth, Avenue Calgary, Top 40 Under 40. The UN of Canada, the City of Calgary Awards, the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, and the Calgary Chamber, among other organizations, due to inclusion factors, impact, and reach. And that excites me, and it felt important to share that data because I want people to understand, again, the lens in which you show up to the expertise that you bring to this broad topic. And so, because you've been recognized in so many capacities and so many different organizations for your work, I would love for you just to take us on a journey of understanding what has inspired your work and your journey of belonging and strategy and change management.
It's now entering my 16th year of doing this work. So
Wow.
sometimes I have to stop and pause to remember all that brought me here. But I was originally preparing for a career in human rights law 15 years ago. And during that
Mm,
time, articling and doing my undergrad, I was exposed to a number of cases related to workplace discrimination, sexual harassment. And what frustrated me was we were stepping into these situations after the harm was already done, which what lawyers
yeah,
really,
after the fact. Yeah,
yeah.
very active.
And that's what lawyers do, right? And I realized I was preparing for a career where it was solely focused on damage control. And I always wanted to try and get ahead of the harm. And that tension and that frustration being in a place where I was preparing myself to be in a career which was focused on damage control, and I wanted to pivot out of it, became fuel for figuring out, okay, what else can I do? What role models are out there that are getting ahead of the harm that have like kind of a legal
Yeah.
background? And it exposed me to women such as like Verna Myers, that really, especially in Canada, wasn't as visible as it was in the US. And that's what
Mm,
inspired me to really build my career around inclusion, employee experience, and proactively work with HR and legal leaders to shape cultures that not only address exclusion, but prevent it. And so I'm really grateful to start a career and have really built a career where, again, exclusion is not just kind of brought up as an afterthought. It's really strategically thought about how do we proactively prevent this from happening and having that influence that impacts like today and future talents. As much as I love the awards and the accolades that the clients that we have submitted on our behalf have done for us, that's what really drives me every single day, really having that impact and that influence ahead of the harm to really work with leaders to provoke, to really practically prevent that from happening.
yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your journey with us. And so, as I just take a moment to pause and step away from our script and our questions, we're very fluid here. One of the things that is coming up for me is, of course, you're in Canada. I
Yeah.
would imagine that do you have a number of clients that are in the US that you serve and support as well? Okay, yes, I figured as much. And as you're sitting back and you're watching and you're very privy to all that's happening in the US, how has that impacted appreciated the way in which you are showing up now, especially considering that you have a constituency of support that you're providing within Canada. And I'm sure there's its own set of challenges, right, from a political perspective, but then you also are very much privy to what's happening here in the US. How are you navigating all of this right now from a business perspective and support to your clients?
Yeah, so a lot of the clients that we work with that are based in Canada, they are global. So they have operations across the US, Europe, Asia, whatever it may be. And how
Yeah.
we're really mindful of advising them from a global standpoint is really making sure that when we are providing recommendations, we have that cultural nuance there. So in
Yes.
Canada, we have our own equity legal frameworks. In London
Yes.
and Asia, they have their own legal frameworks. So whenever we're thinking of a global strategy or a global approach, we always have to be mindful not only of the cultural nuances, but the legal frameworks that accompany those cultural nuances. And when we do that, we make sure that our recommendations are rooted within reality and also protecting the organization from risk of just having like a one size fits all approach. What's happening in the US is absolutely disheartening, and it's absolutely kind of the opposite of what's happening in Canada, where we're increasing our human rights legislation around inclusion. It's the opposite of what's
Yes.
happening in London, where there's increased legislation around DEI that's making that much more not optional, but actual like legal guardrails if you're going to be
Yes.
operational. And so, what we do with our clients is again, make sure we're providing a recommendation, we're being mindful of the global context, but we're not applying a US lens to areas where that's not relevant or actually
Yeah.
really push back because they're culturally they are absolutely opposite of what's happening in the US. So really again for any global practitioner, everyone always understands we really want to make sure when we're giving recommendations what's happening locally, culturally, what's the legal frameworks around that, and how do we make this stick in a way where it resonates with the employees that are in those areas and not trying to create a broad one size fits all based on unfortunately the retraction and
Yeah.
the lack of progress that we're seeing in the US.
Yeah, no, I so appreciate that because, while we are very much in the thick of things and how it's impacting a lot of organizations, whether or not you are in the federal space or you rely on the federal space, right, to be able to operate, we are watching that closely and we're seeing a lot of evolving that has had to happen. But what I also appreciate about this conversation and what you just shared, Elise, is that is bringing to the forefront the importance of the global presence, right? And I think that sometimes we can miss that just because of proximity to, the spaces and places where we may find ourselves most often. So I appreciate that call out. I also just want to talk a little bit about when you think about navigating the complexity of what's happening right now within the US political landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And also in context of what you just shared, what I am finding is that a lot of organizations are relying solely on their legal teams or legal professionals to tell them what they can and cannot do, right? What can you do? What won't you do? What can't you do? All those things, right? And what I appreciate about the lens that you're bringing to this conversation is not only are you like a DEI, practitioner, but you also have the HR background. You also have the legal background. And so oftentimes without the hat of the DEI focus and the HR focus, legal can just definitely try to send an organization in a direction where you're trying to totally eradicate all the risk. And what I have been noticing myself and really encouraging our clients to do is you can't just rely solely on the legal context. That's critically important, of course, but
Yep.
we know that the hat that oftentimes legal wears, especially if they don't have all of these other cross-functional disciplines that they are very skilled in, is going to be how do we mitigate risk? And I think this is a time from a leadership perspective, it can't just be simply about how do we just eradicate the risk. What are we willing to do from a leadership perspective, from a mission and core values perspective? And sometimes that can be missed. I would just love for you, because you have the blend of the different worlds, to kind of speak to that, please.
Yeah, so what I've seen done really, really well is legal teams working with executives to find out what's the strategic direction. And then
Yes.
the executive teams goes to the DEI teams to say, okay, this is a strategic direction. Now, what's the implementation or the KPIs around this? Because that's your expertise.
Yes.
And this is the part that's really missing that I see a number of organizations, unfortunately, have doozies with. You should be involving your communications leader at the onset of this work more now than ever. There's an evolving language around this work, not only with the pivot of going just beyond just doing events around diversity calendars, which I love, but strategic system-driven work, there needs to also be accompanied, how do we communicate this that's aligned with our language, how we do business, aligned to our strategic objectives, aligned to our values. So that way we don't need to change the language or how we communicate this work based on who's in the office.
Yes.
It's as simple as when we talk about operational excellence, when we talk about psychological safety, when we talk about safety, when we talk about operational reliability, when we talk about performance. When we talk about those things, we do not care who's in office because that's just how we do business. And so what I see a number of organizations that are really getting ahead of the curve of evolving of the global kind of landscape of what inclusion's about. It's not only the legal leaders, which typically, have very little appetite for risk because that's the way how we've been trained. They're working alongside the executive team, the DEI team, and the comms team to make this a really fulsome organizational change, not just something that's happening at the HR level, and then you have your people leaders scratching saying, so what the heck are we saying?
Yes, 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 yes. We are so aligned on this, and I'm so glad that you're bringing this additional amplification to this point, and particularly calling out the importance of the Marcom professionals. As someone who has a background in that space, I'm like, oftentimes it's not so much about what we do, it's how we're positioning, how are we bringing people along with clarity of the message, how are we kind of reframing it in a way that still allows the core essence of what we want to stand for to remain. And so I love all of that, and I agree. We have to pull each of those key stakeholders together because every individual, a part of that stakeholder group, has a role to play in helping the organization to land at a place that is the best interest of all the constituencies that are aligned. And so thank you for that. So of course, we've talked about your law and justice background, and of course, international relations is a part of your history and your story as well. But then there's also this academic path, right? And so how has the academic path shaped your current work as a belonging strategist?
When I started when I started my academic career in 2004, I had such a different viewpoint of where I was going to be. I'm glad I've landed where I'm at right now. Uh, Quickly, I think the way how my academic path has shaped my career right now is because I think when inclusion, when it's done well, like when it's done really, really well, it is a
Yes.
powerful legal governance model that creates talent and business outcomes. Um,
Yes.
and so my background in terms of law and international relations taught me how to leverage employment equity, legal
Yeah.
frameworks to advance policies, representation, whilst also protecting the organization from legal, human rights, or talent-related risks. And it also gave me like the tools to treat inclusion not just as a value,
Yeah.
it's a legal talent risk strategy that protects
Yeah.
and strengthens an organization. And so really my academic background, and I don't think you necessarily need to get a law or an international relations educational background to be in inclusion, but it did give me the lens and the language to really apply a cultural nuance, really to advising leaders when it comes to inclusion work, especially at a global level.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. That's fantastic. So let's talk about your business inclusion factor. I know that I've given a little bit about the clients that you serve and the work that you do. And I referenced that part of how you like to show up to this work is very much with the focus on data-driven strategies to create those inclusive workplaces. So can you share maybe a specific metric or tool that you find, Elise, to be most powerful in measuring belonging?
So we are a very evidence-based organization. We like to make sure before we tell you a recommendation is rooted within reality based on what
Yes.
your employees are saying or your customers are
Yes.
saying. One of the biggest tools that we use just to get like a level set of where an organization's at before we go in and provide recommendations, we have a belonging pulse assessment. And what that does is it measures not only where your organization's at from a representation standpoint, but where's your organization at from an employee well-being standpoint, access to opportunity, psychological safety, and not just within a certain group of your organization, but broadly across employee groups, identities, and locations. And then we pair
Yes.
that with listening sessions just to surface the nuance, because sometimes in surveys you just don't get the
Hmm.
data you need to make like a firm, concrete
Right.
recommendation. And so when we really combine that hard data with like that human insight, you get a 360 view of where your organization's rocking it, like where we do not need to do
Mhm.
anything, if anything, we need to sustain it, and where we
Yes.
actually need to like roll up our sleeves and create some improvement on. And I want to make sure I'm all about tangible takeaways. I know people could have been anywhere in the world today, but they chose to be here. If you don't have access to proprietary tools such as like a belonging pulse assessment through a consultant, there's also like the global DEI benchmarks. There's
Yeah.
also iOS 3415, I think 30415. That's like a global DEI benchmark that most organizations will use alongside iOS standards being for like operational excellence, safety, whatever it may be. When you use that iOS language, it really bodes well with like the COO or like some type of operations leaders that also use those type of iOS metrics for other areas in their business. So I hope that's helpful for someone that potentially doesn't have access to a consultant's proprietary measurement tools.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for dropping the gems of tools and resources. We love that here on this platform. I also appreciate the recognition that we can't just try to solve for gathering evidence-based data from quantitative data. We do need to have those listening sessions, those focus groups, those one-to-one interviews where we can deepen and contextualize those responses in a way that allows us to be even more informative around solutioning for how to build some very inclusive healthy workplace cultures. And so thank you so much for calling that out. Um,
Mhm.
and I also appreciate that you said we may find some things that we want to reinforce and sustain. And I think that's important to lift out because sometimes when people hear the word assessment, they automatically, okay, you're just trying to dig up all the dirt, right? So much so to where they have a hard time even, saying yes to the idea
Yeah.
of doing some type of assessment. But so for the love of all of the practitioners that are in this space, Elise and I just want to make sure that we amplify. If we ever encourage an assessment, it is not because we're trying to be the gotcha cops or just find everything that you're doing wrong. It's also to unearth the things that are happening well, that you want to reinforce, that you want to maybe double down on, to use that as traction and momentum to go after maybe some of the harder things that you feel also you want to be a part of your trajectory and really just excelling from an inclusivity perspective. So yeah, don't be afraid of that word assessment.
I've had a number of different clients where we did the audit or the assessment and they felt like we're terrible at X, we're terrible at this, only to find out through the assessment, actually, you're really good at X.
Yeah.
And maybe you're being hard on yourself because you are expecting to be like the Nike of this type of
Yes.
work. And you're starting at step one. And for step one, you're actually doing quite well in this area. So again, it's not about trying to figure out, where you're bad. This is not like being pulled into the principal's office. We're just trying to
Yes.
make sure if we provide a recommendation, I'm actually doing it based on data. So that way we're not trying to make work where it's not necessary to make work.
Yes, yes, exactly. Because trust, there's going to be a lot of work to do because you really are competing against yourself. Sometimes people will want a benchmark, and it's because they just want to see, am I, maybe at least performing better than XYZ organization. I always say, when you're benchmarking, the best way to benchmark is to benchmark against yourself. Where do you feel like your potential is? Now, there's certainly a lot that can be learned for what other organizations are doing, and maybe you can take portions of that, not necessarily all of it in its entirety, but portions of it, and then apply it to your respective organization. But I find that sometimes we use benchmarks almost as a crutch to say, okay, well, we're at 80%. That's a little bit better than XYZ, so we can stop now. And I always say, if you're not at 100% across the board of all the things, then you still have work to do. There's still an
Yeah.
opportunity for growth. And so I love
Yeah.
that.
And then
Okay,
just one last piece I say for
please.
assessments, we also do that to make sure we aren't boiling the ocean. I've worked
Yeah.
with a number of different executives that they want to do 18,000 things in 1 year because they're such advocates of this work, which we love, right? But we don't want to do 18 things poorly. We want to do three
Right.
things or two things, do it exceptionally well, so that way we're continuing to build buy-in and transparency and
Yes.
capability of this work. So again, assessments are
Absolutely.
not a bad word. If that's the takeaway of today, I'm thrilled.
I know. We've we've done our job. We can end the talk now, right? No, but that's so important. That is, I often say, what can we do? What can't we do? What won't we do? We need to have great clarity around that, because I'm sure, Elise, that in the number of assessments that you've done, you probably have been able to identify many different, recommendations. But it's not necessarily so that just because you've conducted an assessment and you've unearthed this information, that you have to do something with all of it at once. We have to ties. So your point about boiling the ocean, I think that's another trepidation that organizations come into these conversations with. If we now identify all of these issues or opportunities, then we're going to have to do them all, and we're not equipped with the capacity, the bandwidth, the resources to do them all. And I'm like, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah,
That's then when we use that data to strategically plan around how are we prioritizing these opportunities.
you
There
got
we
it.
go. There we go. Okay. Okay. So let's move on. I hope this is helpful for you all, because it's certainly, Elise and I are having a good time. If you're getting something, we appreciate that. We're having
I'm nerding out right now, but I hope this is as helpful for people.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So let's talk about, performative DEI, right? I think that this is a topic that tends to surface when we're really, especially in a time like now, where there's so much scrutiny around how in which people are showing up to this moment, related to their DEI work. And do you have a way of guiding organizations to move from what's known as kind of performative, very surface level activity versus impact, right? Initiatives to real systemic change that impacts, retention and performance and all of the things that we really are looking at. Not a statue, not a mural, not a special kind of cultural event. We know that can be important. It can be useful, but
Absolutely.
how are we moving the needle around systemic change so it's not viewed as performative?
So what we will do with executives, I like to make sure when working with an organization, we like to have an executive viewpoint because executives do absolutely set the tone of the
Of
direction
course.
of inclusion. We like to find out, how does inclusion anchor into your business goals? And we
Mm,
don't want to just say that at like a high level. We need to know specifically with a script, or at least like bullet points of how this ties into retention. So is this about being a preferred partner that builds talent for today's and tomorrow's customers? How does this build into your innovation? Is this about building the best ideas that solve your customers, needs? How is this tied to operational excellence? This is about making sure we have the best talent for the job that drives a 24/7 operation of excellence, whatever it may be. How is this tied to
yes.
customer experiences? But drilling it down, what I often find is when inclusion becomes a siloed kind of side project where it's not really woven into the business. Like, we don't have
Hmm.
tangible examples of how it's woven into the business. And let me give a tangible example. So we were working with a food retailer that's similar to Kroger's in the US. We were able to build in sensory friendly hours to be mindful of their shoppers that have sensory friendly needs. We were able to build in different AI software within their pharmacies that read out prescriptions to potentially individuals that English is a second language, or
Hmm.
individuals that don't want to interact with a pharmacist for some reason,
Hmm.
or elderly individuals, whatever it may be. But systems driven work tied to real business outcomes is really key. So that way we move beyond, again, I love the events around diversity calendars, no shade to that. I love
No
it.
shame.
But that's not where we see the most impactful change occur for all employees. When we
Yes.
redesign systems around hiring, promotion, pay equity, employee voice, customer experiences, that's where we start to see inclusion be much more visible and not just a side project. And that's where we see like inclusion propelling performance and really propelling those tangible kind of cool success stories that we love to see in the news whenever we're thinking about organizations that are doing this really, really well.
Yeah, yeah, no, those are really great examples, and I love the amplification of we have to make sure this is fully embedded, woven into the business, all areas of operation. And one thing that I am seeing is that people are starting to now become much more intentional about that because they have to. And let me explain what I mean by that. We have had to help support clients to there was no other choice to dissolve their formal DEI programming and initiatives. And so with that, it still was important to keep the essence of the value of the work, the spirit of the work, if you will. And so part of the recommendations is that let's still continue to have a mindset, those ambassadors within all the departments that is continuing to be that conscious, of how people should be showing up, the decision-making process, or they being very inclusive and thinking about who's being impacted, all those things. And so my point is that I think that there is a way in this season where we're having to be very creative and innovative to still continue to do the work without necessarily having to have a formal DEI department set up within one organization. And I'm only saying that because the reality is that we are dealing right now with some organizations that they have no choice, right? They're 90% of their budget is coming from the federal government. So we have no
Yeah.
choice to comply. But yet and still, when it's built into the core values, and you can just amplify the core values, then the work still continues, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's important to amplify because a lot of individuals are facing that right now and they're feeling defeated by it. So you want to share?
Yeah. No, I think when you weave it into how we do business, whether
Yes.
it's systems, whether that's language that's not
Yes.
divisive or going to be weaponized in the future, whether that's creating training or L&D efforts that really do align with strategic objectives of the organization, that's where you don't again necessarily have to worry, not worry, but you don't necessarily have to have so much visibility or concern about what's happening externally, because what you're doing internally is so tied to the business and to the strategic objectives, where it's a no-brainer that this is a part of how we do business or how we work at the organization.
Absolutely. It's just built into the DNA.
Yeah.
We are going to be shifting momentarily to give the audience an opportunity to address any questions and curiosities that maybe are bubbling up for you. If you're part of our Zoom community, you can do so by simply using the raise hand feature that lets me know that you're willing for me to invite you to unmute yourself. And if your camera's on, I will even add you to the spotlight. Otherwise, you can just place your questions, comments, contributions into the chat. If you're on LinkedIn Live, we have not forgotten about you. Go to the comment section, share your questions, and we will introduce those with the allotted time that we have left. So I'll give you a moment to kind of percolate on that while I'll go to my next question. And this goes back to the topic of belonging that I know that you spend a lot of time supporting individuals and clients through in terms of building a sense of belonging into their cultures. When we think about times of crisis and change, which a lot of that's happening right now, right? Whether nations are having, rifts because of the economic downturn, whether or not they're having to disband, dissolve some of their initiatives that have felt a place of safety for employees. All of that can be considered on the spectrum of, kind of a crisis moment, right? And so let's talk about the importance of centering belonging as it relates very specifically to those moments of trauma, of change, and of crisis.
I think when you center belonging, this is where trust comes in, and which is critical in
Mhm.
moments of crisis or even when
Yeah.
things are going well. I think trust is the foundation for high performing teams, and when it's woven into leadership development, performance reviews, it becomes a lived experience and not just something that we say every now and then. So right now, more than ever, whether it's authentic leadership, whether that's trust, I think it's really critical to have that woven into your organizational values or your leadership approach. Because when we prioritize like collective success over individual success, that's where we see, psychological safety growing, innovation, collaboration, whatever it may be, performance growing. And so when I think of a belonging centered workplace, especially during times of crisis and conflict, I can't emphasize that trust would be the area where you have most agency and
Yes.
control over, in an area where you have zero control over a number of different circumstances and factors. And really applying that in a way where it's not a one size fits all. How I would gain your trust is absolutely not how I gain trust with teammate B. It's really about having those check-in points, letting people know that you have an open door policy, letting individuals, as much as you can, know what's happening so there's not an assumption or perceptions of what's occurring behind the scenes. And again, really leveraging trust in a way that's tied to your values in some way or another to showcase that this is a leadership principle, this is a cultural experience, and this is my leadership approach during a time where we can't control much, but I control how I show up.
Yeah, that is so good. And
Yeah.
I I tend to believe, and I say this because of the inquiries that are coming our way to support leaders through becoming more agile, becoming able to lead through uncertainty and ambiguity. And we have a community of practice called the Future Proof Leader that is designed just for that. How do we upskill leaders to be able to show up in moments like that? And so what you're saying is really resonating with me. But as you talk about trust as part of that change management process and that sense of creating belonging, I think trust goes hand in hand with transparency.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that a lot of individuals right now are grappling with to what extent of transparency is healthy and at what point is full transparency need to be evident. And so when I think about maybe organizations who are having to reorg, have rifts, they're letting people off, economic downturn, or maybe again, they're disbanding because they have to, or they're changing pretty significantly all of the work that's, been valued related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What are some guide or some tips that you provide for clients for really leaning into transparency and how to do that in a way when they sometimes don't even understand and know what the outcome's going to be?
I think being honest, right? As the people leader,
Yes.
at times people will assume that you know every single thing that's happening in the organization. Being honest about the visibility and transparency that you can provide as a leader, being really open to communication with individuals on your team when they have a concern or they want to talk about where their career is going in the organization. Providing as much resources as you can. I know I've worked in organizations where there's been sector downturns that I absolutely had zero control over, nor did the executives of our team. It was a sector,
Yeah.
it was a
Yes.
downturn happening in the whole entire sector. What my role was to make sure, as a people leader, I'm being as transparent as possible. I'm informing you and really distilling what the executives say, but what that means to our team. Because from a change
Yes.
management perspective, the executive says this, but the person that your teammate wants to hear from the most is their people leader. Because
Yes.
you're going to
Yes.
distill and translate what's being said at the very top to what this means in operations, in marketing, in HR, in finance, whatever that team looks like. I've also made sure to provide as much resources as possible to let people know, hey, I can't predict if it's going to rain or not, but I can bring an umbrella. And what I can do is provide as much resource for you from an L&D standpoint, provide as much opportunities from a high visibility project standpoint to help you get as much exposure as possible, and to also let you know that if there's anything that occurs, that I'm going to be there for you as a people leader to inform you of what the change is, and of course afterwards as a person. Because if you're on my team and we usually work together, we develop some type of personal connection. So I let you know that like I have your back regardless of what happens. If there was ever a time where I was exited or you were exited, that we would somehow maintain a relationship, or at least I would support you in your career endeavors after the fact. But I usually like to make sure as much as possible you provide as much transparency, communicate and translate what's happening at the top to your teams, what that actually means, like what's the in it, what does this mean to me, like the so what piece, and then as much as possible create an open door policy for as much coaching, support, transparency as possible. But it's a tough situation to be in. I've been in it
Yeah.
myself where you really can't control um, what the stock market says.
Yes.
You can only control yourself and your team.
Yeah, that is so good. And
Yeah.
I can only sense that the value that you're bringing to your clients who may find themselves in such a predicament, because what you just shared, Elise, is spot on. It centers the human approach to leadership in a way that I think gets lost, when we are in the midst of volatile times and circumstances and crises within organizations. And here's what people have to understand. Employees are not necessarily expecting the messenger to fix it, but they are expecting the messenger to care and be empathetic and to lean into a sense of vulnerability. I mean, I think that the vulnerability piece is so important too, because, if we don't have the answer, 9 times out of 10, those individuals are also dealing with the same type of anxiety. And so there's a connection point there. There's something that's relatable about navigating that together. And I love what you said about the people leaders, the direct person, because oftentimes, there's this Eiffel Tower of the C-suite folks who are kind of making the
Of
decision.
course.
And the bottom line is that while that group of stakeholders is really, really critical, I tend to preach and crusade for the fact that those middle managers are the ones who have the biggest influence because they're the ones who are closest to the larger critical mass of people that's being impacted. And
Absolutely.
so we need to do better at preparing our middle managers to be able to lean in all the ways that you just described. And I don't think that's happening enough. Are you seeing the same?
I definitely am seeing the same. What I'm seeing, especially with the ambitious people leaders, is that they're beating themselves up for not knowing this instinctively. And
They are.
it is upsetting to me, especially as a strategist, because this is a core competency that you should be
Oh,
equipped with, similar to the
yes.
way you're equipped with safety or any
Yes.
other core competency in your organization. So, one, people leaders, please don't beat yourself up. There's ample resources that I've had to even lean to online in times where I was going through those moments of crisis and I couldn't go to my L&D or my intranet to find a resource. I had to go online to find out, hey, what are people leaders doing when there's a massive layoffs? How do you create engagement and keep performance up when teammates are saying goodbye to people they've worked with for decades? How do you create an open policy where I'm not creating a risk for the organization and saying we're going to keep you when I most certainly can't say that? How do I toe the line of protecting the organization from risk, but also showing up as a human?
Yes, yes, all of that, all of that.
Yeah.
And it's so often that all of that is never addressed and never put to action in terms of preparing and equipping individuals to be able to have the skill sets to navigate those situations.
Yeah.
And I think that that is to the, it really is actually to the, who loses are the employees as well as the people who are going to remain and stay because they're carrying that to your point, right? Especially the empaths. They're really grappling with, because we've heard of what survivors remorse,
Yeah,
those who are
traumas.
able to remain in the organization, and then you're thinking, I couldn't really show up the way that I wanted to. And so there's something to be said for really addressing the importance of full planning, considering all of these things that are being brought into the consideration side as we're discussing it today.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, questions and comments, the floor is open. I invite you to raise your hand if you're part of Zoom or just place them into the chat. We're watching that closely. I'm going to go to the next question while we just continue with the time that we have remaining. So there is something in Canada, a certification that was not familiar to me, and maybe it's familiar to the others in this community. I want to see, but it is ProSci Change Management Certification. So tell us about it first and foremost. And how do you blend change management principles with equity and inclusion strategies?
So the ProSci designation, it is an international designation, but what it really does is coach individuals about how to manage the principles of change in an organization globally, how to get buy-in for it, and then how to actually measure assessment for it and roll it out. And when I say change, it could be everything from changing your office from flick switches to automated lights. It could be switching your office from, having a standard garbage disposal to expanding to having recycling and compost alongside garbage disposals. Or it could be people centered change, such as inclusion. How we like to make sure we weave this into inclusion is, again, before I do anything, I like to make sure where are you at from a
Yes,
change perspective? Because we
yes,
don't want to assume that we need to do 18 things when actually we
exactly.
need to do
So we
two
have to
things.
assess, not a bad word. Yes.
You have to measure. And what I also like to do with change management within inclusion is we really to make to reduce stakeholder buy-in.
Yes,
This work is really driven by executive buy-in, middle management buy-in, which I think is not a discussion that we have enough because if your executives buy into this and your middle managers or people leaders don't, there's going to be a huge gap of getting the message down to your people leaders or down to your employees, given that people leaders have the most access to employees. And so, what we like to do again is really assess, understand the buy in kind of mapping within your organization. And then when we roll out recommendations, make sure that we're applying things such as determining people's behavior. So, is there a
yes,
desire for them to even want to learn this? If they're not at the desire standpoint, this is what we need to do. If they are at an awareness standpoint where they're aware of this, but they don't know how, great. That's where we come in with these tools. If they are absolutely rocking it and they have the tools, the awareness, they understand why it's important to the business, great. How do we mobilize them as ambassadors or role models for other leaders? But it helps us create much more of a structured cadence approach to doing this work that executives as well as our clients approach, because what it creates is a roadmap that's really easily aligned to the business strategy. It has a full understanding of all the stakeholders, the players that we need to be mindful of, as well as the KPIs of how we define success as we're rolling this out, which is really critical whether you are designing a strategy or whether you're implementing it.
Yeah, I love the practicality of it based upon the way that you just described it. And I think that's what a lot of people need is give me a playbook, help me to understand from a sequencing perspective and the how-to behind this big, kind of concept of change management, right? Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's important. So when I think about change management, and I think about how it definitely correlates to the broad work of equity and inclusion.
Mhm.
And I also think about technology and the advancement of technology that is moving so rapidly. We're seeing it now with, of course, all of the AI technology. Have you
Yeah.
seen, and maybe you have even supported clients with very specific change management strategies as it relates to implementation of AI? Have you seen that yet?
That's one of my favorite projects to take on. So
Great.
I love being able to weave in technological advances into inclusion. So that way it creates, again, much more of a systems driven approach. And the thing I love about that is because the clients we work with, they realize that AI is also fraught with biases.
Yes.
And so they like
Yes.
to include an inclusion strategist at the onset of this work. So that way, when we roll it out, technology or AI, we're being mindful of those biases. But I've seen AI woven into things such as that. It's called Script Talk, that AI software that's available at pharmacies. So that way people can be able to access their prescriptions in a way that's accessible based on their needs. I've seen AI woven into talent acquisition systems or ATS systems where it blocks out candidates' names, their post-secondary educational institutions, their location, all things that create biases for us where we think this person's cool because they went to the same school as me if they grew up in the same area as me. To even AI being woven into leadership development programs. We have a client right now that we just launched a program where it's a kind of like a la carte approach to inclusion for their leaders across the globe, where depending where they're at in their kind of leadership competency, it gives them tailored tools and training based on where they're at. And we wouldn't be able to do that it'd be much difficult to do that as an individual practitioner doing that with about 6,000 leaders across the world. This is where AI comes in, where we could be able to design a software that helps mobilize and really speed up the process of coaching leaders in a way that still aligns us to get our competencies, but reaches them in a much more expedient way versus us going to Luxembourg, London, Singapore. As much as I love to travel, it just wouldn't be the most cost effective way for the client.
Yes, no, absolutely. And yeah, and I am seeing that the importance of customization within like the learning path is so important these days. And I think that what that does for organizations who are making that investment is it allows them to be able to realize the collective capacity of the individualized learning that's taken place. Because otherwise, if we just toss something out there and we assume that it's going to be for everyone, right? We're only guessing and maybe getting just a fraction of the people that's part of that kind of global learning experience. But when it's customized, it definitely can yield greater collective output. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that. Yeah.
And it helps be able to report. Like I've also seen AI in dashboards, which I love, but it helps from a reporting standpoint to say, hey, out of the 6,000 leaders that we have across the globe, Singapore has completely competed all of it. London's actually at 60%, whatever it may be, but just helps with quicker reporting in a way that um, is a lot easier versus the human touch.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's important. And before we move off of AI, I couldn't agree with you more in that it certainly is a powerful tool, but it's also a tool that has to be used with great level of responsibility.
Yeah.
So there needs to be some guardrails and some guidelines of deployment, of design. I've worked with a number of organizations around the intersection of diversity, equity, and inclusion to AI. And if anyone's interested, I also have a LinkedIn Learning course, which is on the same exact topic that addresses some of the examples that Elise has shared. My team will place that into the chat if you're interested in it. But it's not something to be afraid of, but it's definitely something to ensure that we are being careful and mindful about as we are using it, implementing it, and even how we influence and make and encourage how our organizations are using and using AI technology. So we have about 6 minutes left, and I want to talk about trends right now. Lots of trends, I'm sure, that are, you're seeing emerge. I'm seeing a lot emerge, particularly in the DEI space. So are there any in particular that stand out to you, trends in the DEI space that organizations should be preparing for now?
The thing I'm hearing across all our clients globally, which is shocking at times, they're shifting from those one-off events, which we all love, and they're keeping them, but they're thinking, how do we move it beyond just diversity calendar events to systems-driven inclusion work that drives measurable results around retention, engagement, performance. So a lot of them are moving from those kind of service level efforts because their executives or investors are demanding tangible reporting around, hey, how is our inclusion efforts improving profitability? How's this
Yeah.
keeping talent? How's this protecting us from future talent that's going to be astronomically different than talent 5 years ago? And
Yes.
so really right now, the clients, what I'm seeing, the trend I'm seeing is they're treating this like any other business imperative if they're moving forward with this. They're realizing, hey, there's obviously been a lot of pushback. The pushback is something we're mindful of, but we're not going to be stopping our efforts, but we need
Yeah.
to evolve our efforts. Maybe this pushback's actually giving us a time to pause, look at our efforts and say, hey, is this really systems driven work? And so when I think of like the comparative of this, I think you want to be like Costco, you don't want to be like Target. Target, Costco made strategic long-term investments in inclusion, paying, and now it's paying off with higher profits, increased
Yes.
foot traffic, stronger brand loyalty, even market growth in times of economic uncertainty when other food retailers are clutching their pearls, being like, like
Mm-hmm.
we're doing right now. Target dropped their inclusion efforts due to the pressures of the administration in the US. They're now facing their 10th week of low foot traffic, $2
Yes.
million a day of loss. That would hurt me in a way that I couldn't even verbalize. The CEO scrambling to meet alleged leaders of the Black community and racialized community, which I didn't even realize those were leaders of our communities. The CEO just got a 45% pay cut due
I was
to
going to say the same. Yes. 45% pay cut. Yes.
because of lowered revenue and fell short on performance results. So right now, that comparison, I share that comparison because that's the model of the future of this work. The trends
Yeah.
I'm seeing right now is organizations are starting to move away from treating inclusion like a PR campaign,
Yes.
and they're starting to get into systems driven work so that way they report the accountability of this and also get into the game of really getting the outcomes of this work like Costco is.
Yes, and I think it's a smart move. I think that some of the criticism that I've heard is that perhaps it's going to cause people to lose the humanity aspect of inclusion because we are going to be even more focused on the business imperative. But I think that it is a both and. I think that we still can drive the humanity story
Yeah.
as well as push the business, imperative aspect of it, because this is all about involvement and sustainability. And you're so right, Elise. I am also seeing that no longer the days of activity and that's going to get us by. We're looking for impact, and you can't drive impact if it's not within the systems. And so that is a word that I'm hoping this audience is really going to take heed to. So we have maybe about 3 minutes left, and it's our tradition here to allow our guest co-host to kind of close us out by sharing something that perhaps we have not talked about today. I'm sure there's a lot more that we could have carried on conversation around, but is there something that you have a lot of energy and passion for that you really want to make sure you socialize with this community?
I think really the future of this work is more of a and or versus either or proposition, and I'm starting to see like that discussion. Really, what I will say to individuals, and you could leverage our website. We have a stay in the course resource that really breaks this down for individuals so they can manage this in their organization regardless of the resources. Really tie this into the strategy so that way you don't have to pay attention to the noise or what's happening in the headline. This is how we do business, and it becomes much more sustainable that way. Frame this in a win-win, and that's why we're starting to see organizations pivot to inclusion scores or things that are much more system driven because it creates much more impact for all employees, so that way
Yeah.
it kind of diminishes that resistance. And then I know there's a lot of talk about, is it belonging, is it inclusion, is it fairness? What
We call the thing.
you could call it Chewbacca. Really, whatever works for your team it really does not matter the word. It's more about what is aligned to your values, what's aligned to the business that make employees feel respected, valued, and heard. And whatever that word is, whether it's organizational effectiveness, respect, fairness, whatever that looks like, hold on to it because that's what resonates true for your organization.
Absolutely. Very well said. We have definitely enjoyed your insights today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with our community. We hope that if you found this conversation of value, you will catch the podcast, you will share it out with others that are in your network. You can also catch the replay. And we hope to see you again next week for another episode of Intentional Conversations podcast. Have a safe weekend. We appreciate you all. Thank you for being a part of our community. In the chat, Elise's email and her LinkedIn information is there and her website. So make sure that you reach out and you be connected to stay closely in touch with her content. So thank you all so very much. Have a great weekend.